Well, welcome, listener, to this episode of Over It. I'm Dr. Donna Gilman, and I am here with Julie Rich. Julie, welcome to Over It.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
And Julie, I first became acquainted with you through our mutual friend Joni. I was looking for some help around my house. And Joni said, I have a very good friend, and she's probably too busy to do it, but I'll ask her. And then you came into my life, and it's been a couple years now. I think that you've been coming to the house, helping me clean and stay organized. You've given me a lot of tools and strategies and nudges in terms of like what to buy to be more organized and how to like just keep up a little bit with cleaning, which is definitely not something I'm great at. Um, and through the last few years, I've come to realize that you have a lot going on. You have a lot of creative pursuits and you're a multifaceted person. And I would love for you to just share a little bit about, where, you find yourself in your life, sort of, at this age and where you find yourself drawn to and kind of like what's the landscape of your life, Julie?
That's a big question.
It is.
Well, I would start with coming into your life as a house cleaner because I think I became a house cleaner on Cape Cod right after my divorce because I was a stay-at-home homeschooling mom and I went through a nasty divorce and I was really kind of desperate. And Cape Cod is a really lucrative place to do house cleaning. And I had a friend who was a professional house cleaner, and it really saved my life. And I've had to sort of deal with the stigma of, I'm 58 years old and I clean houses, among other things. But I really look at it as kind of a caregiving and kind of the person who taught me how to really clean was what told me once, whenever I'm making somebody's bed, I'm always picturing tucking them in, and it was just
Oh,
lovely. So I
love
love that.
that.
Yeah. So I like to do work that has some kind of purpose, helps other people, or is creative, basically. And I've had a lot of good fortune that I've been self-employed and an entrepreneur for 30 years or something, like a long, long time.
And
So I
you
have a lot
cobble
of,
a lot of different things together.
yes, yes. I used to call myself a Jill of all trades and a master of none, but I have somebody who's come into my life who's forcing me to call myself a Renaissance person,
A Renaissance person. That's right. I
which
mean,
is hard.
you alluded to sort of the stigma associated with this one piece of your work, which is providing house cleaning and organization. From your perspective, what has that stigma been like? Do you encounter it in the world? Do you encounter it in yourself?
Yeah, I think it's all part of the like wearing a lot of different hats, but also I think, just comparing yourself. I was thinking about when I was going to talk to you, I was like, I've always wanted to be one of those people who does something for 30 years and becomes an expert. And
Mm,
I mean, I have done some things for consistently throughout my life, but it's mostly creative things that aren't normally thought of as, any kind of status or
hmm
it all has to do with comparing myself to others and their professions and their way of life and, the usefulness of it or which is silly. I mean, I was raised to be like, do what makes you happy. And I'm so lucky with everything I do. But yeah, that's the stigma basically
mm.
is,
And yet you've had, as you say, the good grace and success of being an entrepreneur and self-employed for 30 years, and you've made that work. Can you speak to some of the other aspects of your work and creative life?
yeah, so I've always been an artist since very early on, and I went to art school, and that's another little stigma. I only went to art school, I never went on, but in my mind, I was like, thank God I don't have to go to any more school. I learn a lot by doing, and then there's just things I've always wanted to do. I always wanted to be a florist. And so I just became one. I always wanted to be a massage therapist, so I just became one. And then most recently, in the last 15 years, I became a Zumba instructor. And that was really just by happenstance. And that was another kind of turning point that really saved my life. And I look at it as really a service and a community service and total joy and dance and choreography. It's just, I could go on and on about Zumba. And then really recently, I became vegan. And since I love to cook and cook for people, I, of course, I'm like, okay, now I'm a vegan chef, and how am I going to make that into a business? So I'm always sort of looking at ways to incorporate what I love to do. And, they say, like, if you love your job, you never work a day in your life. So pretty much that's what I'm going for.
You have this remarkable ability that I think is envious to constantly look inside and ask yourself, where is that next passion point? And then you align with it. And how and on earth did you become like this? How do you give yourself permission? Because I think that's one of the things that
Mm.
many women struggle with is like, how do I give myself permission to tap into my creative potential and like
Mm.
follow some of these intuitive hits?
That's a good question. I mean, my immediate answer is I kind of was just born this way. Like, I have a friend who just is always saying, "You're so brave." I don't feel brave. I feel like that. Like, I just knew I wanted to be a florist. So, like, why not? I do feel like I do have the attitude of like, what are you waiting for? Like, if you want to do something, or you have something that really feeds your soul, go for it. And there's definitely things that I fail at, um, like relationships. What a segue.
Oh, what a segue. Well, Julie, you know what? Talking about relationships, that's really, that's the thing. So
Yeah.
you
Well,
said there are things I fail at. I mean, can we
mm,
just stay there for a second? I mean, right? We all have our concept of what failure is, but to your point, there are things I fail at, but
yeah, but I keep trying. And I too, I recently listened to a podcast about what we call success or failure, and how, of course, before you succeed at anything, you usually try. So, what are those tries? Are they fails, or are they practice runs, or what are they? Um,
mm-hmm.
but when you're dealing with, basically, I have this story right now where I've gone through three major breakups since last November. So what is that? Like less than a year. Um, and
Wow.
it's exhausting, and it
You
feels like
keep getting on
failure.
the horse. You keep getting on the horse. So that's an interesting level of perseverance. I mean, let's get into it. I mean, I guess I'm wondering like what meaning do you make of that? Wow, I've had three, you said major breakups in the span of less than a year.
Yeah.
And so what do you make of that?
I'm not sure if I'm like an eternal optimist, or lately I've been thinking, I mean, when I started thinking about what am I over, and I'm not really sure, because I do pursue my passions, and I don't have a whole bunch of regrets. And I mean, I have these awesome kids, and I have fabulous friends, and I have work that satisfies me. So what am I over? Um, and I sort of think it's my perspective on life, about relationships, and things that you go for, um, that maybe you don't get right away, or you don't get in the same way that you envision. Like, I'd like to be a lot more successful as an artist, for example. I'd like to snap my fingers and make my website wildly easy to use and super lucrative. I'd like to have live classes in the town where I moved to right before the pandemic. I'd like to have a bigger reach. There's a lot of things that then I stop myself and say, ah, you know, maybe you only get so much in life. Maybe, yeah, maybe some people, this is, oh my goodness, I got into I get into trouble saying this, but I sort of think, well, maybe you don't get it all. Maybe you get great kids, but not a great relationship, or maybe you get a
So
great
that's, I
relationship.
wonder about there, right? I wonder about that right there,
Yeah.
that application of that belief that, hey, I've got so much, maybe I can't have it all.
Yeah.
Oh,
Which
does
is,
that sort of
it's
manifest?
I think
Yeah,
it's
how
a
does that
self-limiting
manifest?
belief.
A
Yeah, it's a
self-limiting
self-limiting
belief
belief. Yeah.
that has
Um,
something to do you think, with who you choose unconsciously to partner with? Or like, how does that self-limiting belief play out in terms of relationship?
well, that's the million-dollar question. Um, so I keep trying. The more I try, the more I believe that I'm worth it, that I'm worth, having a great relationship, a great partner. Um, and I'm always trying to learn, about my own psychology, and what I'm looking for, and why did it fail. I've made a lot of progress, really. I used to be a super judgmental person and try to change the guy, which always works well, right?
Try to change the guy, right? Yeah.
Yep, that's a good strategy. Or I'd like settle for less. That was a big one. Um, oh, maybe I just won't have great sex with this person, or maybe communication. I had a boyfriend once who didn't like to talk. And if you know me at all, like, I love to talk. Like, I like to process. And
Hmm.
then years later I had a boyfriend who was like, I don't like to verbally process. It's like, well, how else do you process? So
That's hilarious. I don't like to verbally process. So, what are the other options? So,
right.
right. So, you've been through the iterations of trying to change the dude. That doesn't work. You've been through the iterations of maybe I could settle for less than what I really want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other iterations that haven't worked out so well.
Yeah, all those none of them have worked out so well. Um
And then
and
trying to understand like what you're bringing, obviously, to
yes.
the table as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because really, I mean, I'm of the belief that your primary relationship is with yourself, and the
Hmm.
only thing that you can control is yourself and your own reaction to things. And yeah, I feel like I have made a lot of progress, and in terms of judgment, anger, like fighting, processing, overthinking. I mean, there's just like, I could name, 100 things probably that can go wrong in a relationship. Am I right?
Okay. Yeah, there's a million things that can go wrong. And there is the capacity, right, that each person brings to the table, like the emotional muscle that each person brings to the table. And really how much capacity have they developed to
Mm.
date that would allow them to create and sustain intimacy over time? I mean, that's one of the things that I'm always looking at in each individual, and not through the lens of pathology and there's something wrong with you, but really like what skills and like what developmental growth edges or deficits does each person bring to that equation?
Right,
Because
right.
often we look at the relationship as a third entity, and oh, the relationship didn't work out, the relationship couldn't sustain that. Or we look at the other person and we say, obviously they weren't skilled enough. Or we look at ourselves and take all of the blame on ourselves. But through this lens, it's really about getting really clear, for each person. Like, what are you bringing to the table? And what kind of internal scaffolding are each of you sort of lacking that would allow you to lean in together and be able to really have healthy navigation and negotiation around the differences that exist between you? And I know that's a lot to throw at you, but I'm wondering, does it resonate? What does it make you think about?
Yeah, I think it's a good reframe for myself, in terms of, I do feel like with every relationship, I learn a little bit more about myself, and about, not just what I'm looking for. I don't have a laundry list, but yeah, how the two people and where they are in their own growth how they can, help or hurt each other, the relationship. Um, and it kind of goes back to, I think I'm pretty skilled actually. I'm a good communicator, and I've worked through a lot of self-worth issues, which I think
Yes.
was a lot of the beginning, like, oh, love me because I'm not worthy, love me, then I can feel okay about myself. And I'm definitely over that. I'm definitely like, I love myself. I am awesome. I mean, I certainly have lots to learn still, and deficits or whatever. But I do feel like, that hierarchy of needs. I feel like I'm a lot closer to self actualization than just trying to get by and you know manipulate the situations. And I'm in a good place. And I don't need a guy. I don't need somebody to complete me. And I do want a companion. I do have a big that's what keeps me going, right? I want somebody to share this amazing life with. Um so
Given
that
how much work you have done on yourself, Julie, I imagine it is quite baffling and disheartening at this point that the last couple of relationships really haven't worked out. And I'm sure then you're left wondering, so what is it, right? I've done all of this work on myself. Like, is my picker broken? Like, is the part of me that picks, still carrying something? And again, kind of coming back to, when you think about these last three relationships, um, what do you think went wrong? And I'll give you my little Dr. Gilman perspective.
ooh, great. Well, what I really need the Dr. Gilman perspective on is the plot thickens, because the very last one was like the highest high and the lowest low. And I stuck with it, and I persevered. And 4 months later, we're going out. So there's a part of me that's like, oh, was I, is that a good idea?
So I want to make sure I'm following. The
Yeah.
two of you were dating.
Yeah.
You went from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows. Something happened.
Yeah.
And then now you're back together again. And
Yes.
it seems good.
Yes.
So do you feel like something was resolved? Were the two of you able to take an issue and work it through and
Yes.
repair whatever that rupture was?
Yeah, yeah, I really do feel like that. And I feel like I've been waiting for somebody who can kind of meet me on mental, physical, spiritual, emotional level, which is a lot to ask. And I really thought that's how it felt. And, um, but basically, I feel like he wasn't ready, circumstances and stuff. And he broke up with me, which for my ego was, I'm usually the one who's like, see ya, this isn't working out. um so for me to be in this position of like, I persisted, and I really, kind of kept being, well, patient, which is not my strong suit, and kind of forgiving, which is one of my spiritual practices. And now just curious, like, how you never can know what's going on for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it felt like. I just kept saying, we didn't give it enough time. We didn't give it enough. We weren't curious. We kind of jumped to conclusions. And so now it really feels like we're getting to know each other.
Over It is proudly sponsored by the Couples Center of the Pioneer Valley, offering specialized services to couples and individuals with relationship issues and concerns. Check them out on the web at pioneervalleycouplestherapy.com or call them at 413 570 0067. There
And
you
this was,
go.
yeah,
I
yeah.
just want
This
to say, like, you're ringing a lot of bells for me because in the work that I do, which is the work of differentiation, um, some of the major developmental sort of practices that we need to engage in order to grow more capacity as adults who can maintain healthy relationships are things like managing our sense of urgency when we're
Mm,
not sure, like, how the heck are we going to figure this out or work this out? Will we work this out together? Really being able to like dwell in the ambiguity, like, oh, we are in the muck. Will we ever work it through? I don't know, but I'm willing to kind of hang in there long enough to try to see. You talked about forgiveness. So, sort of that, I think that stems from compassion for first and foremost self, and then the extension of that grace toward the other. And thirdly, curiosity, which most people don't think about as a practice, as a skill that we can develop, but it very much is a developmental skill in intimate relationships, is the ability in the face of your differences, in the face of confusing behavior on the part of your partner, to be able to be curious and to express that curiosity and not make assumptions and be wary of our own projections and narratives that we're sort of projecting on that other person, the ability to say, no, hey, let me clarify something. I'm confused. I maybe I'm hurt, but
mm,
I'm still really open to understanding more about your perspective if you're willing to share. And even if your perspective is not the same as mine,
mm.
like the ability to kind of hold on to ourselves in the face of our partner's different reality is a huge emotional muscle, right?
Yeah, and I think if two people don't have that, if only one person has it, it's too much of a disparate skill set, I think. Um,
That is true. If there's too great of a chasm, right, then that will reveal itself. And at the same time, if there is a great chasm in terms of capacity, but there is a willingness
mm,
on both people's parts, right, to do what I think you're saying, maybe the two of you have done in order to come back together, which is to say, I'm willing to give us more time to see what unfolds. I'm willing, because in that scenario, each person is challenged to grow, right? Even
right.
if, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but even if one person thinks like, I am miles ahead of my partner, you are going to be challenged to kind of like hold on to yourself and manage your
Mm.
sense of urgency if it's important enough to you to give your partner the space to lean in and to grow.
Yeah, and I think it's especially hard um, at the beginning of relationships when it seems to me that a lot of patterns are like set at the beginning, right? Um, so to come at things with an open mind, like I don't know what this relationship is going to bring. I mean, I've really had so many since divorcing. I mean, not dozens and dozens, but like 3 2-year relationships and, just a lot. It feels like a bit of a revolving door. And, um, yeah, I do feel like this waiting for somebody who maybe matches my interests and capacity to look at the relationship as something, um that really does need a lot of skills. It really does to have a healthy one. Like I had a perfectly lovely husband, honestly, great dad. He's a great person, um, but it didn't meet all of those levels, and to leave that relationship, I think was probably the bravest thing I did, and I did it because I wanted to model for my kids what a really healthy relationship would look like. Um, so, to have that high bar and then to maybe find somebody who is firing on all those levels, but then to yeah, to really like say, my sister really taught me about curiosity. I mean, she does this thing with everybody. Actually, she's a counselor, and she goes, a lot.
Hmm. Right.
Hmm.
And of course, the is a lot easier when you're not in intimate relationship with someone. I mean, you're obviously intimate as sisters, but I mean, our adult relationships, I always say, are like the Olympic training ground
Hmm.
for this concept of differentiation, which involves so much capacity, opportunity. It's the opportunity to lean in and grow capacity within the context of a relationship if both people are willing. And it's the opposite of sort of waiting for the other person to change before you change. It's the opposite of waiting for them to make things safer before you step up with more vulnerability. It's the ability to say, I'm going to be accountable first and foremost to myself, to be vulnerable, to be honest, to do a deeper self inquiry, to really understand the complexity of what I think and feel and want, and take the risk of revealing it. And even if I'm really good at that, the other part of differentiation that's equally important is how well do I hold space for my partner when they come forward with
Hmm.
the complexity of who they are? How do I not get threatened by our differences? How do I not get reactive in the face of what might feel like competing needs or different visions or perspectives? How do I hold space for my partner as they unfold, as they take risks? So it's super, super complex. And certainly, yes, relationship dynamics do get set very early on in a relationship because we tend to drag our baggage in, right? So the ways that we've been surviving up until that point, which we can't knock those survival mechanisms and coping strategies, will inadvertently cause more pain for our partner. And the very ways that they've learned to survive whatever pain they've had to survive will inadvertently end up causing more pain for us until we understand all of that on a much deeper level.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really especially true dating. I mean, in my late 50s, and everybody has so much baggage. And I happen to be dating men. And in my experience, the emotional intelligence and, there's just, you know, there's some challenges. Um, so yeah, I'm curious. I've never heard you talk about differentiation.
You mean as you're bopping around my house telling me that I need to buy shelving and stuff to keep my fridge more clean? I haven't talked to you about differentiation.
No, no.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I don't typically just walk around talking about it, but it is essential. It is the root to sustained intimacy in relationships, and it's a super interesting concept. And I mean, not to take any steam away from anyone, but what the research shows is that we tend to attract a partner to us that has about the same level of differentiation that we do within 1 to 2 degrees, and that can be really humbling to hear because I think most of us want to feel like we're a little bit more together than the people that we're in relationship with. It's just that differentiation looks really different from person to person. I may have certain skills and certain deficits that are very different than my partner's skills and deficits. So we wear differentiation maybe very differently, but we're usually kind of neck and neck. It's ultimately usually a level playing field
Hmm.
when we really look at it, which is really sobering for a lot of people.
Hmm. Yeah, that kind of jives with my attitude about dating morphed into, it doesn't really matter who you're with. I mean, in terms of like if you have attracted somebody and you're attracted to them in some energetic way, there's stuff to learn. Um, so that kind of speaks to what you were saying, that you're kind of, it's a level playing field. Um,
And
but
I'm by no, yeah, go ahead.
you do get to choose what playing field you want to go hang out on.
Well, it's absolutely true as long as people realize that when you pick up your bat and your balls and your glove and you move on, be really clear about what it is you're bringing with you. Because,
Mm.
it's not that I am in my capacity as a couples therapist, that I don't see my job as it's my job to save every relationship.
Mm.
But it is important for people to understand. You shouldn't stay in just every relationship, but it is important to understand if you leave a relationship, what was yours that you brought in and what are you bringing with you? Because it will be manifest in the next relationship, even though the combination of your crap and their crap might look a little bit different. You're still going to encounter the challenges of navigating the differences that exist between you. And and so after you make it through that very important honeymoon phase where we really bond and we become attached, there is a natural and predictable stage of disillusionment that will set in. And if you're in a relationship long enough, it's usually at least by the 2-year mark that disillusionment will set in, and it's meant to. It's meant to be a developmental challenge for, okay, now we're close enough that the risk of loss is great.
Mm.
I may lose you, you may lose me. There is the risk of criticism, there's the risk of judgment. So we're really in now the what everybody claims they want is more intimacy, but really the really scary world of intimacy, which involves the unfolding of each person over time and how in the world to navigate all of that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I've always considered myself sort of an intimacy junkie,
Mm.
and I tend to go in super fast and super deep and all in and here open a vein um and now I'm seeing, that doesn't that's very hard to come back from, but I manage to do it, and I have sort of a superpower of picking myself up and dusting myself off, going at it again. Um but yeah, that's really fascinating to think about, that 2-year mark and the honeymoon phase. I mean, that's another part of it all, right? Like the attachment that happens in the first flurry of new relationship energy. um
And that is essential. That's an essential stage in the development of a relationship,
mm,
right? And so, but what people need to understand about that is even that stage takes a certain amount of capacity, right? In
mm,
order to even bond with someone, we need to have the capacity um, to be able to attach, right? To be able to attach. And also in that early stage, it's inevitable that really what we're typically focused on are the ways that we're similar. Like,
mm.
oh my goodness, oh yes, you look and smell like home, and oh, we have this in common, we have that in common, and then we fill everything else in with our fantasies and projections about this is finally the person that's going to make it all right for us. But no matter what, that is all meant to fade. And when that next stage of disillusionment sets in, it's typically where people go, oh crap, I've been sold a false bill of goods. You are
Mm.
not who you purported to be. I am out of here.
Yeah.
When really disillusionment is a very important challenge. In now things are getting real, right? Things are getting real. We've now, unfolded to the point where I see some of your warts, you see some of mine. Maybe some really big things have already happened in the course of our relationship that maybe have been stressful and unexpected. We've seen how one another react to stress, and things are getting real, right? And most of us as adults are not equipped to really deal with intimacy when things get real.
Mm. That actually makes me feel like all of this failure is going to really actually help me. And my perspective right now, anyway, is very present moment focused. And I think in the past, whenever I've met somebody, I've thought, oh, shiny new object. How are we the same? What adventures are we going to go on? Because I am such a manifester and I'm
Mm-hmm.
very creative and I'm limber. Like I could go to I have gone to live in Costa Rica. I've sold everything and reinvented myself at least 3 times. So I'm always like looking at like the future and how would we fit together. And right now, anyway, I'm like, this is what's happening right now. And it feels a lot more grounded. It feels a lot more realistic. And hopefully that will help when the disillusionment and or if I ever get, to that point of,
Disillusionment is inevitable. It
yeah.
is inevitable in adult relationship because unlike parent-child relationships, that's the only sphere, parent-child relationships, where truly unconditional love can exist. So we are bound to disappoint one another as adults. And in fact, you can't be a healthy adult and expect that you're never going to disappoint your partner, right? In
Right.
being authentically ourselves, we will disappoint. If we're not disappointing, then we're turning ourselves into pretzel shapes to
Right.
acquiesce. And that means there's a lot of collapse going on in the relationship, which is bound to lead to resentment and acting out behaviors, right? So disillusionment will happen. And I know it's a hard thing to hear when we're
Thanks.
in the beginning of a relationship,
Thanks,
but
Donna.
it's also normalizing so that when it happens, we don't freak out. Like,
Mm,
oh no, I never saw this coming. I never thought you too would be disappointing, or I would
mm,
be disappointing to you. If only
mm.
we were taught that, yes, disillusionment is going to be a part of relationship and it is an opportunity for each person to grow. Now, you may not ultimately stay together. That is the risk of differentiation when we encounter those differences, when we encounter the pain, learning how to work with that, and then ultimately deciding, if I stay in this relationship, ultimately, will it take me out of alignment with my core values, with my core beliefs, with my core boundaries, with my standards of behavior? I mean, that's why so many people break up and they don't walk away from the relationship with really a true understanding of truly what happened, what their own unique contributions were to things not going well. They may be stock sure they feel about what their partner did, and sometimes you might be right, but having truly a comprehensive narrative about what went wrong, why, how did I inadvertently contribute, without shame and self-judgment, but with that deep understanding, we're sort of bound to replicate some of those patterns in our next relationship.
Yeah, yeah, that it's great that you're talking about it because I do think that there's precious little taught about how to sustain healthy relationships, healthy intimate relationships, and of course we look around and there's so few of them.
So
that
few
that
models, right?
So few models, and what is that special sauce that, I know a couple of them, but a couple, so, and especially when I think about, again, my motivation is always like, what am I modeling for my kids?
Hmm.
And but how, if you don't have the information, if you're not taught, then how can you possibly, succeed?
That's right. A couple other interesting factoids about differentiation is we tend to come into adult relationship with about the same level of differentiation or capacity that was exhibited by our parents or primary caregivers. That doesn't mean we're not more evolved. That doesn't mean that
Mm,
we're not perhaps more emotionally intelligent, but it does tell us something about our origin story and what some of our core wounds are that may still need to be healed, as well as what may have been modeled for us that has informed the kind of emotional muscle or capacity we bring into our own adult relationships before we learn how to do it differently.
yeah,
And
that
yeah,
totally tracks.
yeah. And that, I said adult relationships are sort of the Olympic training ground for differentiation. But second to that, our relationship to our parents or primary caregivers, if they're still alive and still in relationship with them. And the third area that we're challenged the most is with our children
Yeah.
in terms of differentiation. Now, our relationships to close friends certainly have everything to do with differentiation, and our colleagues and coworkers. but really it's the relationships in which we have the greatest risk of loss, rejection, criticism, etc., and the greatest risk of deepening intimacy that differentiation is challenged the most. If you're enjoying Over It, make sure you follow us on Spotify, Amazon Music, or Apple Music.
If you were going to give me a sentence, what is differentiation?
Yeah. Well, this might be a great place to synthesize some of the teachings of Ellen Bader, who created the primary model that I work from, which is the developmental model. And that is that, differentiation it's an active, ongoing process. So it's a process of looking inward that goes for as long as you're alive and as long as you're willing to do it, to look inside and clarify for yourself, what are your boundaries? Do you even know what your boundaries are? What are your needs? What are your desires? What are your bottom lines? Do you have any internal conflicts about certain issues? We all have internal conflicts. We tend to lead with just one aspect of those conflicts or what we believe to be true without really exploring or being able to express all the grays of what we think and feel, all of the nuances. So, first and foremost, differentiation is about being able to continuously be willing to look inside and not assume you know everything about you. It's continuing to be curious about yourself as you grow and evolve and
Mm.
change, and really take stock of being really clear about, like, what are my inner narratives? What do I tend to project onto my partner? What assumptions do I tend to make? What are those stories I tend to tell myself without clarifying or checking them out with my partner? Do I have some understanding of how I was shaped by my family of origin and my earlier relationships? So that's one key part of differentiation. And the other part I alluded to, which is being able to hold on to myself in
Mm.
the face of my partner
Mm.
expressing their complexity, their needs, their wants, their differences in perspectives or visions. How well can I hold on to myself without flying off the handle, steamrolling my partner, or shutting down and collapsing, like letting go of key parts of myself in order to hang on to the relationship? Like, how well can I manage my reactivity in the face of my partner trying to express some of what makes them them? So that's the other part of differentiation. And and then, what kind of capacity do each of us have to lean in and start to try to negotiate some of the very real differences between us?
Mm.
You know, most couples don't have the capacity to do healthy differentiation.
Mm.
They either end up in gridlocked patterns of hostility, or patterns of like hostility, and then we sweep everything under the rug,
Mm.
or they become full out conflict and issue avoidant, or some hybrid combination of those things. But they never really can get to the point where they can take their big issues and work them through from beginning, middle to end.
Mm.
Ultimately, what that can result in is you may stay together, but be in parallel play.
Mm.
And it's almost like the relationship starts to leak vital life force energy
Mm.
because you can't really navigate and negotiate the differences that exist. Does that make sense?
It does. It really does. And it's making me think a lot about what I've been through in past relationships and what I've learned as opposed to, oh, that didn't work out and that didn't work out. Because I do feel, like I said, I feel more self actualized. I feel more like I can hang on to myself. When you said twist yourself into a pretzel, I definitely feel like the last three relationships um before this, I would say that I would say I don't want to twist myself into a pretzel. I was like kind of clawing my way to hold on to myself, while still not just, um you don't want to. You don't want to just accept everything. You don't want to accept bad behavior or bad treatment, I should say. You don't want to accept being treated badly. And I feel like I've been treated badly a lot, and kind of took me a long time to sort of identify it. Um,
Right.
yeah. And
That's key. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, I had this sort of a therapist once who said, you should find a bowerbird. And you know what a bowerbird is?
No.
It's this bird in that it's this kind of a bird that does this elaborate nest making and dance and flickering. It does this. You can look it on YouTube. It's
Mm,
hilarious. And they basically really go all out of their way to attract a mate, the male species. And her point was, be sure that the person is really in it, that the person really wants this, as opposed to somebody who's just dipping their toe, or they don't have the capacity to really look at, they don't want to do the work, basically, of you really, I feel like you really have to kind of devote yourself to the other person's growth, and they're devoting themselves to your growth and your growth as a couple, because you can't see your blind spots, right? So you're in something
yes.
with somebody
Yes.
who's like, I've got your
Yeah.
back, and
Yes.
you've got mine,
Yes.
because together we're better. We're gonna see the peripheral dangers, if that makes any
Right.
sense.
Right. Yes, that does make sense. So you were talking about the willingness on each person's part to really do the work, to do the internal work, and then to
Mhm.
be willing to lean in
Mm.
and apply that work to the relationship. Because it is true that individual growth and development can inform relationship growth, and relationship growth and development can inform individual growth,
Mm.
right? But it all has to happen. I think one of the greatest, so, and you also talked about being treated badly,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And we're all going to have, I mean, sometimes being treated badly, we can all agree, we cannot be involved in physical and emotional abuse. But short of that, being treated badly, we'll all define that a little bit differently. So it's so important, right, for each person to be able to define for themselves, what are my boundaries? Like, how do I know when I'm being treated badly? And what do I do about that? Is it a deal breaker? Is it am I justified and warranted in ending this relationship, or is this a time where I really need to assert a boundary and see if that's a boundary this person is willing to work with me around?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm the kind of person that can spend a lot of time ruminating over, should I stay or should I go? And is this healthy? Is this not healthy? Is this me? Is this him? Is this a development? Is this, so um the thing that made me kind of stick with this relationship is that when it started, I had this vision of like, oh, this is how it should feel. Like it shouldn't be a big question of, right from the beginning anyway. And I don't know if that's what you think about that, but that's the first time I've ever been in a relationship where it's like, oh yeah, all those levels, which was my personal kind of goal, was to find somebody who I could connect with on physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, which is a tall order. But that was my, that's sort of my, I don't know if it's optimism or, optimizing, or that's what I
Right.
wanted.
I think that's just it. That's what I wanted. It's
Mhm.
it's neither a tall nor a short order. It's what you wanted, and you recognize you need
Mm.
in order to lean in and be willing to do the work of relationship.
Mm.
And so you've tried to get away with less than that in the past. And what you keep coming up against is, no, my truth is I need to be met somewhere on the bridge, in all of these spheres. And it's not going to be perfect. But I need some willingness to meet me on the bridge in all of these spheres, or it won't work for me, which is a very different messaging than the old messaging of maybe I just expect too much and I'm being unrealistic, or, who am I to think I can have it all? It's really being in the truth of oneself that all of these things actually matter to me and I need them and I'm willing to do the work and I just want to be met.
Yeah. And when you say, I need it, I can hear myself go right to, oh, but you could do with less, or you don't deserve it, and that's the stuff that I feel like, no, I'm over that. I've had plenty of examples of it. Just my need for this is as real as anything.
That's right. It's not convenient, really, to be sometimes in the truth of oneself,
Right.
right? And we can keep trying to bat it away and it'll keep coming up and through.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
You have the spaciousness in yourself now to hear that old part that still wants to chime in and say, it's good enough. You don't have to have it all, just settle. But
Mm,
then you have this other growing part of health and well-being that says, no, actually, this is what I want. And it's what is going to actually work for me. So if it's going to actually work for you,
mm,
then it's only actually going to work for the right person or the righter person,
right.
or else
And
it's a setup for you both.
right. And it makes me also want to say, like, there's such a great risk for going for what you need or want really, really, because if you don't get it and you end up alone, that's a tough thing. I mean, I feel for people. I see people who are in relationships that are very obviously not satisfying, and but they don't want to be alone.
Yeah, it's a choice. It's a choice point for all of us. I think there's a couple choice points. We can choose to be in relationship and just accept the relationship as it is, even though we may not be happy and our partner may not be happy. We can ask our partner to do work with us in some kind of relationship counseling. We can choose to leave a relationship and explore growth and healing on our own so that we can strengthen and grow deeper roots into our own adulthood. And then hopefully, and I believe this, that the healthier we get, the magically we tend to attract people that are closer to where we are in our own healing journey.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, here's hoping.
The dilemma is often we just are so blown away by someone that we kind of jump in the deep end together.
Right.
And it's okay to jump in the deep end together as long as you have the awareness that as we bob back up to the surface and we look at one another, our differences will emerge over time.
Yeah.
And we may or may not, each of us have the capacity or skill set to navigate that. And so sometimes we just make up our mind about someone, or they make their mind up about us before we have all the information we need about ourselves or them.
Right. And I'm hoping that kind of having the attitude of today is all I have. This is where I'm at. This is what I've learned. These are, there's still more to learn, but I have learned a lot. And um and that curiosity thing, like not jumping to um I know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. Those differences might be too much, or I might not have learned enough to really be able to grow with another person. I might have chosen badly again. Who knows?
So many times things get chalked up to the idea that we're incompatible. Oh, we fell in love and then we realized we weren't really compatible.
Mm,
And for me, that's well, wait a minute, let's slow things down a little bit.
mm,
It's not about really, I mean, we see couples who are very different from one another, but they have learned, sometimes with professional support, how to navigate those differences so they work well enough for each person.
mhm.
We see couples who have much more in common, but they still don't make it work. For me, it's about the capacity to navigate and negotiate solutions that work well enough for each person where you can each stay in that relationship and not compromise the core of who you are.
Mm. Again, here's hoping. I mean, it actually, everything that you're saying kind of jives and makes me feel hopeful because I do feel like I've done a lot of work just by being in relationships, not, working with a therapist necessarily, recently, or, a lot of self-help books or anything, but just really like getting on the horse, like you said, like getting on the horse and getting thrown off the horse that many times, like you learn some things.
Well, you've taken the time to reflect.
Mm.
Those times where you've either climbed off the horse or been thrown off, you've taken the time to reflect,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
this is all the stuff that I love to think about and talk about. Interpersonal relationships are my jam. So, yeah, and my own development, and where I need more help, and but where I excel too. And to me, this whole podcast of like, what am I over? It's like, stepping into yourself and stepping into myself and saying, it's good. It's good enough. It's where it is, and it's better than it was, a year ago, and certainly 15 years ago. And
And I'm willing to risk exploring and exposing the complexity of who I am. And I'm going to do that. And
mm,
that takes priority over the salvation of a relationship.
mm,
Because if you find yourself dimming your light or hiding certain aspects of your truth or leading with just one part of your truth because maybe the other part of your truth isn't going to land, then you know that in a way is a form of, well, it's a setup. It's a setup for both people, but it's also weirdly enough, it's a form of leaning out. It's a way of abandoning the self, and it's also a way of leaning away from the partner because we're not giving the partner an opportunity. And it is true, sometimes we reveal ourselves, we take a risk, and the partner drops the ball. They don't respond well in the moment. They do overreact. They do take things personally. And then what do we say? Oh, see, I knew I shouldn't have. I knew I shouldn't have taken that risk, or I knew that person couldn't hold this aspect of myself. And that may or may not be true. But if what we do is we go back into, well, forget it, I'm never going to raise that again, or I'm never going to expose that part of myself again. And the other person's doing their version of that. That again is where we get to a place where whether you stay together or not, you're not really leaning in towards one another. It's too risky. And the process of differentiation of each person unfolding over time, it is inherently anxiety producing. And
mm.
there is no way around that anxiety. I mean, yeah, you can navigate around that anxiety and not really ever deal with things.
I think you're making me think that it's so ironic that we all want to be partnered because we want this companion, this ride or die, this, grow old together. But n- I don't know anybody who really wants to sign up for the Olympics, it's tough. It's a lot. It demands a lot. And it is, I wrote this poem lately. It was like, with great risk comes great reward and great risk. Like there's no
That's it.
avoiding the
There
risk
is,
of all of it, of being exposed, and then how vulnerable that makes you. And I'm all about vulnerability and all of that. And it's not easy. It is not easy.
and it's not easy in a longer term relationship either, where, yes, patterns of reactivity are even more established.
Mm,
If one person decides to take on the work of differentiation and they wake up that morning, they say, no matter what my partner does or doesn't do, like I'm really going to hold myself accountable to my own standards of behavior. I'm really going to watch my own reactivity. I'm really going to be mindful of my own triggers. And then the minute they walk into the kitchen and they see that face, the look on their partner's face, they're off to the races again.
It's like, what are you looking at? Right.
Exactly. You're off to the races again,
Mm,
you know, and that's where we're most challenged to hold on to ourselves and manage our reactivity. We
mm,
are not going to grow at the same time. We're
mm,
not going to grow at the same pace. You are going to encounter yesterday's partner when you're trying to be your new today. But, that's where we're really challenged even more to walk the path and not continuously look over to see, well, what's that person doing? Well, they're not doing what they said they were going to do. So screw it. I'm not going to do what I said I was going to do. This is about personal accountability. Now, someone might say, yeah, but Donna, that's not fair. Like, what if you're always the one that's like doing the right thing and carrying everything and you're martyring yourself? And no, that's not what I'm talking about either.
mm.
But if one person is differentiating and the other person is not, then over time, yes, that chasm will grow. And you may have a decision to make. You may have a decision on your hands, which, by the way, is why unconsciously so often we don't allow ourselves to really grow and expand within a relationship because we know deep down if we do, it's going to really upset the apple cart. And that person may be upset and they may abandon or reject us. The
Mhm,
relationship may end. We may
mhm,
have to end the relationship. And so there are ways that unconsciously we do avoid the work. We avoid the individual work. We avoid the collective work because of the level of enmeshment and what's at stake if one of us were to change,
mm.
right? So we do prioritize sometimes the salvation of that relationship over our own growth and development.
Yeah, it it just makes me think about when my kids were growing up, and I thought, why aren't people teaching, kids about money? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no classes on money, and money's so essential. Not how to write a check or balance a checkbook. This I'm showing how old I was. Um, and this makes me think the same thing. Like, why isn't this stuff more readily just taught as a matter of course? Like with dating, like I actually used a matchmaker. I used a matchmaking, mass match. I was on mass match, which was way better than match.com or any of those
This
kinds of
was a real
things.
life
An actual
matchmaker,
person.
an
Yeah.
actual
Yeah.
person.
An
Yeah.
actual, little Jewish lady who, this was during COVID. So, but anyway, and she had some good advice, but that, 2-year mark and differentiating and what the real work of relationships is. I mean, I think people just don't really, myself included, don't really understand that that's what they're signing on for. And I think I've just been very willing to sign off if it's not working.
Well, and
um,
we would again need to understand more about what you mean when you say not working. If what you mean is, oh, it was really clear that I was, expressing boundaries and these were core boundaries for me, these were bottom lines, and they
yeah.
were being stomped on, that is definitely not going to work. If it's not working because um, you're each waiting on the other to change or to show that it's safe to come forward and you're gridlocked, that's different. I mean, from my perspective, the hard reasons for divorce, the hard reasons for breakup are actually few and far between.
Hmm,
There is far more substance and content in relationships that is workable than people realize.
hmm,
But understandably, just to your point, we're not given the tools or the education we need to understand what's workable and what's not. And what the heck do I do with all of this? There definitely should be curriculum, starting in elementary school on like the things we all do in life, which is like use money, have a relationship to food that can sustain us, and like how do we create healthy relationship? And how do we know what unhealthy relationship looks and feels like? And that would probably get us farther than like geometry and algebra, but I'm sure those things have their place. um,
Do they
yeah,
though? Have either of
yeah.
us used geometry at all outside of whenever
I
we
understand what a right angle is, but beyond that, right. So, right. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know how to do it any differently. And that's why they're really, for me, there's no judgment when people
mm,
come in as confused and upside
mm,
down as they are. And
mm,
they've sometimes existed in misery together for decades. Can't live with you, can't live without you kind of scenarios.
mm.
Or there's those couples that, have been together for a long time and all of a sudden they break up and everybody's shocked. Like they
Right.
had no idea, right? They had no idea. And that the corrosive level of avoidance that can be in a relationship that's,
Mm,
invisible
mm.
to the world. So, yeah, I know we're talking about some big stuff here. I'm just wondering, like, thinking back, right, on the last year you've had of the ups and downs of relationship and finding yourself now in a much more grounded space with someone who may have the potential and willingness to meet you on the bridge. Like, what else is maybe jumping out at you about our conversation? Is there anything else you might be
Well, I
percolating?
feel like I've learned a lot, so that's
Oh,
awesome.
cool.
Yeah. And I do think there's something about kind of riding the wave, like not really knowing. Yeah, you don't know what you don't know, but wherever you are, you can do a little bit. You can do something. You can try to keep your balance. And I tend to just I try to be very grateful for even the negative things that happen because I know there's growth opportunity. And I also know that when really big bad things happen, generally speaking, you know, eventually something good's going to happen. Like that's just like life. It just tends to, you might go through, I have gone through an incredibly bruising time with relationships. And um, I keep saying, I think September is going to be great.
Hmm. And yes,
Um,
I'm holding all the light for you around it. And also, cultivating every one of those losses or pains that you've experienced through past relationships, really cultivating that, like really mining each of those experiences to get a greater understanding of self,
mm,
right? Because that's really all we can do. A greater understanding of self. Where do I tend to get reactive? Where do I tend to get triggered?
mm,
Where do I tend to collapse? Where do I tend to steamroll my partner? Where do I tend to hide aspects of my complexity for fear they won't find a safe landing space? And where did that come from? And what do I do about it? Because one thing is for certain, whatever is unhealed in us, it will it will work towards the light in our current relationship,
mm,
and it's meant to.
mm,
It is meant to come to light because there may be an opportunity for it to be transcended or healed. Um, and the same for the other person. And unfortunately, what ends up happening a lot of times is we just end up taking each other's pain really personally. And we start to assign malintent to our partner and things like that. Like if you really loved me, you wouldn't react that way. If you really loved me, you wouldn't cope in the way you're coping. If you really
mm.
loved me, you would make that change we talked about. And so often what we think we're asking for is simple behavioral change, but actually what we're asking for is developmental growth. It's the building of more capacity. And most of us need some kind of structure and scaffolding to do that. It's just like when a child is developing and they're learning how to pull themselves up to standing. We often give them those little assists, like we'll prop them up under their elbows and help them to stand. And as adults, we need that too. We need that too, whether that's, through therapy or, trusted advisors. But we need that too. And our relationships need that kind of developmental assist as well.
Hmm. Yeah, can see that.
Well, Julie, I mean, it's been, yeah, a real like pleasure to hear about some of, your complexity. And, you're someone who is really great about being vulnerable and taking a risk and really putting yourself out there. And I honor you for that. I mean, I think that will continue to serve you well in this blossoming relationship. And, I wish you all the best with it. And for listeners who are interested in learning more about differentiation, you can check out Ellen Bader's book, Tell Me No Lies, Winifred Riley's book, It Takes One to Tango. Those are two great reads about certain aspects of differentiation, if this is a topic that interests you. And I also just want to remind people, if you're enjoying the podcast, to like, follow, and share. And I just want to say a big thank you to you, Julie, for bringing yourself here. And also for, I think, the great model that you are as a woman who follows her heart, follows her creative passions and visions, and really allows herself to grow and change and morph and like reimagine herself constantly. I think that that's just such a powerful model.
Well, thank you so much, Donna. And it's really been fascinating to talk about relationships with a relationship expert. I feel so lucky.
And I feel so lucky that I have you in my life. And I want to thank you again for being part of Over It.
Oh, thanks so much.
Control yourself. Don't drink too much. Don't talk too much. Don't look that way. Don't stare at that boy. Don't giggle. Don't wiggle. That's too short. No one can shackle me. No, no, no. Wait, there's orders. No, no, no. No, I won't give up. No, no, no. No, we won't give up. No, no, no. I don't want to hear this words. How can I man speak this way? How can I girl always seem who hold up this rule? No, no, no. He kissed the desk, he's on last. Can't understand, he won't give up. He looked that way, he stared at me. Don't giggle, don't wiggle. No one can shackle me. No,